Hello and welcome to another episode of Property Ponderings, the podcast where we dig deep into the world of property buying, selling and renovating, giving you property advice to ponder. My name's Craig Nicol, your host. I'm a licensed real estate agent in Melbourne, Australia, with over 15 years of property experience as an agency owner, property investor, renovator, town planner, salesperson, auctioneer and buyer's agent. I want you to make better property buying, selling and renovating decisions to build the future that you are chasing. Today's episode tackles one of the most debated questions in real estate. Should you buy or rent in 2025? By the end of our chat, you'll have a clear framework to decide which option suits your financial and personal circumstances better for the coming year. So let's dive in and get one step closer to your dream property. So let's start with a big picture. In Australia, the decision to buy or rent comes down to two factors: affordability and lifestyle. But in 2025, there are a few emerging trends and market conditions that are tipping the scales one way or the other. So buying in 2025, the pros and the cons. Property prices in many parts of Australia have been stabilising for several years of post-COVID growth. However, interest rates remain a critical factor. While the Reserve Bank of Australia has hinted that we may be at or near the peak of the interest rate cycle, borrowing costs are still high compared to historical averages. So one of the advantages of buying in 2025 is building wealth through equity. When you buy, every repayment contributes to your ownership of the property. Over time, this builds equity, which can be leveraged into future investments. According to Domain's Housing Market Report, property values in Australia have historically grown by an average of 5 to 7% annually in major cities, providing a strong long-term investment case. The second advantage of buying is security and stability. Owning a home means no landlords can ask you to leave unexpectedly or raise your rent. You can also customise your property to your liking, from renovations to landscaping. So the third advantage of buying in 2025 will be tax advantages for investors. If you're buying as an investor, tax incentives like negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts can make property ownership highly attractive. So the challenges, though, of buying in 2025. Number one is upfront costs. On top of your deposit, you'll need a budget for stamp duty, legal fees and potential lender's mortgage insurance if your deposit is less than 20%. In Melbourne, for example, stamp duty on a $700,000 home is around $37,000. So that's no small sum. The second challenge of buying in 2025 is the high borrowing costs. As of late 2024, average variable interest rates are hovering around 6 to 7%, which can significantly increase your monthly repayments. We're obviously hoping that rates are cut in the near future, but at this point in time, those are the rates and the borrowing costs are quite expensive. The third challenge of buying for 2025 is the risk of market fluctuations. While property generally appreciates in value over time, short-term dips can occur, particularly in areas where supply outpaces demand. So we have to be very careful. And we've seen the last few years in Melbourne where things have slowed up, and it's not always rainbows and butterflies. Things take a little bit of time, and there are potential periods of going backwards or staying steady on your property, and you have to be willing to deal with those market fluctuations. So if you're buying in 2025, that's something for you to consider. Now, if we flip the coin and move to renting in 2025, let's talk through the pros and the cons there. Because on the other side of the equation, renting offers flexibility and often lower upfront costs, but with Australia's rental market tighter than ever, it's certainly not without its challenges. So the advantages of renting in 2025. Firstly, lower upfront costs. Renting requires a bond, typically 4 to 6 weeks rent rather than a hefty deposit. This allows you to allocate your savings towards other investments or goals. Secondly, flexibility. If you need to relocate for work or lifestyle reasons, renting makes it easy to move without the hassle of selling a property. And thirdly, the advantage of renting this year could be the potential for lower monthly costs. Depending on the property and location, renting can be cheaper than owning when you factor in mortgage repayments, council rates and maintenance costs. Now let's talk about the challenges of renting in 2025. So firstly, rising rents. Vacancy rates in Australia are currently at record lows, sitting below 1% in many cities, according to SQM research. This has driven rents up as much as 20% in some areas over the past 2 years, with no signs of slowing up. The second challenge is the lack of stability. Tenants face a risk of lease terminations or rent hikes, particularly in competitive rental markets. Thirdly, no wealth creation. Unlike buying, renting doesn't allow you to build equity or benefit from the capital growth. But of course, if you're putting any surplus money that you have when you're renting into other wealth creation devices, then this may not be an issue for you. So here are some key questions to ask yourself if you're unsure whether to buy or rent in 2025. Firstly, what's your financial position? Do you have enough saved for a deposit plus additional costs? Can you afford ongoing mortgage repayments at current interest rates? And then the second question, what are your lifestyle priorities? Are you looking for stability or a long-term base? And do you value the freedom to be able to move? Thirdly, what's happening in your local market? In cities like Melbourne and Sydney, buying might make more sense if you can afford it, as prices have been a little bit slower and projected to rise quite modestly. However, in regional areas, renting could remain a more affordable option. And then lastly, question number 4 to ask yourself is, what are your long-term goals? If building wealth through property is a priority, buying is likely the better option. But if flexibility and minimal commitment are most important, renting might be the way to go. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the buy or rent debate. However, in 2025, the decision will likely hinge on your financial stability, lifestyle needs, and long-term goals. If you're unsure, it's worth consulting a buyer's agent or financial advisor to help you crunch the numbers and assess your options. Alright, so that ends another episode of Property Ponderings. I hope this has given you a few small tips, as always, to help you decide whether buying or renting is what you want to do for 2025. If you do want to discuss anything further from this podcast, or if you're wanting to get tailored buying or renting advice, please feel free to contact me. We're also keen to hear what questions you have so I can answer on the podcast to ensure that you're getting the most from these episodes. Feel free to contact me on 0400 122 081. We'll chat again soon. This podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. While every effort is made to ensure the information shared is accurate and up to date, it may not apply to your specific circumstances. Listeners are advised to seek independent professional advice tailored to their personal situation before making any property, financial, or investment decisions. Nickel Buyer Advisory and Craig Nickel disclaim all liability for any decisions made based on the information discussed in this podcast. Property markets are dynamic and outcomes can vary depending on factors such as location, timing, and economic conditions. Always conduct thorough research and consult with trusted professionals before taking action. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer.